What do you remember most about Christmas gatherings in the 1960s and 70s? The decorations, the music, or the unforgettable appetizers that always disappeared first? Back then, holiday party food had its own kind of magic. Tables were filled with quirky cheese creations, bacon-wrapped surprises, molded salads, and seafood treats. Families saved for the most special nights of the year. Today, let's revisit those warm, shimmering celebrations and rediscover 25 Christmas appetizers that once defined the season, but have quietly faded from our modern holiday tables. Rumaki. If you walked into a Christmas party in the mid-1960s, chances are you'd be greeted by the warm glow of aluminum trees, the soft crackle of vinyl holiday records, and a platter of Rumaki quietly stealing the spotlight. It didn't look like anything Grandma made in the 1940s. It looked exciting, modern, and a little daring. The kind of appetizer that made guests lean in with curiosity. Rumaki was born from America's post-war fascination with Polynesian flavors. After soldiers returned home from the Pacific, tiki bars and tropical-themed restaurants swept across the country by Christmas. Even suburban living rooms wanted a taste of that faraway magic. Hosts would marinate chicken livers and water chestnuts overnight in soy sauce, brown sugar, and ginger, then wrap each piece in bacon and broil it until caramelized. The result was a bold mix of salty, sweet, smoky, and crunchy, unlike anything else on the holiday table. But Rumaki wasn't just about flavor. It captured a mindset. Families of that era didn't have extravagant holiday menus or specialty ingredients. Yet they embraced creativity with whatever was available. If they could see today's gourmet Christmas spreads, they'd probably smile and shake their heads. For them, joy came from the effort, the sharing, and the small surprises that made a simple gathering feel special. And Rumaki was exactly that. A little bite of courage, curiosity, and Christmas cheer. Cheeseball Hedgehog. Long before holiday appetizers became glossy, Instagram-ready displays, there was one dish that managed to steal the spotlight with nothing more than charm and a little imagination. The Cheeseball Hedgehog. It didn't need fancy ingredients or perfect presentation. It captured attention simply because it was fun, unexpected, and unmistakably homemade. The base always started the same way: softened cream cheese, sharp cheddar, a splash of Worcestershire, and whatever secret touch each family claimed as their own. Some added chopped pecans for richness, others folded in dried beef for saltiness, while a few ambitious hosts stirred in ranch seasoning before it was cool. Once the mixture was shaped into a plump little body, the real magic happened. Hundreds of crunchy quill, pretzel sticks, sliced almonds, or potato sticks were pressed in one by one, turning an ordinary cheese ball into a delightful creature everyone wanted to admire before eating. Kids loved it because it felt like a toy. Adults loved it because it broke the ice and made the party feel lighter. And for the home cooks who crafted it, the hedgehog was proof that even simple ingredients could spark joy. In an era when budgets were tight but spirits were high, a dish that made people smile was worth more than any gourmet spread. Deviled egg. In the 1960s and 70s, no hostess dared hold a Christmas gathering without a chilled platter of these perfectly piped bites resting proudly beside the ham and the relish tray. They were the kind of appetizer people reached for almost automatically, as familiar and comforting as the sound of Bing Crosby playing softly in the background. But Christmas deviled eggs weren't the quick, casual versions we see at picnics today. Back then, they were mini works of art. Eggs were boiled with precision, peeled carefully so not a single dent marred the white surface, then sliced cleanly in half. The yolks were mashed with mayonnaise, mustard, relish, vinegar, and, depending on the family, anchovy paste, deviled ham, or a dash of paprika for warmth. The filling wasn't spooned in, it was piped using a star tip to create elegant swirls worthy of a magazine cover. Some families topped them with tiny shrimp. Others added olives or strips of pimento for festive color. What made deviled eggs special wasn't the cost or the complexity, it was the pride. At a time when most ingredients were humble and every dollar mattered, elevating something as ordinary as an egg felt like a little Christmas miracle all on its own. Bacon-wrapped Smokies. Not every Christmas appetizer from the 60s and 70s came from glossy magazines or upscale cookbooks. Some were born right in the heart of working-class kitchens where simplicity and flavor mattered far more than presentation. Bacon-wrapped Smokies were one of those dishes, a humble crowd pleaser that showed up at holiday gatherings from church basements to neighborhood potlucks. The ingredients were as straightforward as they come: cocktail wieners, bacon, and a handful of brown sugar. Host would slice the bacon into thirds, wrap each strip tightly around a tiny sausage, secure it with a toothpick, and line dozens of them across a baking sheet. As they baked, the bacon crisped and the brown sugar melted into a sticky glaze that coated the Smokies like candied meat. The smell drifting from the oven was enough to pull every kid into the kitchen long before the platter hit the table. Jell-O molds and French hors d'oeuvres might have looked elegant, but Smokies were irresistible. They disappeared faster than anything else at the party, usually eaten straight off the tray while still warm. Shrimp cocktail. Shrimp cocktail was one of those appetizers that could make any holiday gathering feel a little more special, no matter how tight the budget was. Even families who rarely splurged during the year often picked up a small bag of frozen shrimp for Christmas. It was their way of adding a touch of elegance to the celebration. The shrimp were usually the small, pre-cooked variety, thawed under cold water, and arranged neatly around a simple glass dish or metal tray. What truly made the dish shine was the cocktail sauce. Most home cooks mixed it themselves: ketchup as the base, a generous spoonful of horseradish for heat, a squeeze of lemon, and sometimes a dash of Worcestershire sauce. That bold, tangy flavor was unmistakable. The kind of sauce that cleared your sinuses and woke everyone up. When the tray hit the table, people instinctively gathered around it. There was something satisfying about that quick dip and bite ritual, the cold snap of shrimp against the bright, spicy sauce. Did your family ever serve shrimp cocktail during the holidays? Share your memory below. Tomato Aspic mold. If you ever stood in front of a crowded holiday buffet and hesitated before taking something, chances are it was the tomato aspic mold. It didn't blend into the background the way crackers or cheese trays did. This dish practically announced itself. Tall, glossy, and perfectly sculpted, it trembled with the slightest movement, making guests pause between curiosity and caution. The recipe was deceptively simple: warm tomato juice mixed with lemon, Worcestershire, celery salt, and a little heat from hot sauce. Gelatin brought it all together, transforming liquid into a bright, firm shape. Home cooks often folded and finely chopped celery, olives, or even tiny shrimp before pouring the mixture into a decorative mold. Hours later came the risky part: unmolding. Every hostess knew the anxiety of that moment. Would it slide out cleanly or collapse in front of everyone? The flavor was bold, tangy, and savory, an unexpected break from all the creamy dips and rich appetizers. Some guests loved its refreshing bite. Others politely avoided it, but whether adored or debated, the aspic mold always sparked conversation, which was part of its charm. Stuffed celery boats. Some appetizers earned their place on the holiday table not because they were extravagant, but because they brought balance. Stuffed celery boats were exactly that. Crisp, cool, and refreshing, the kind of bite that quietly cut through all the rich, buttery dishes crowding the buffet. They weren't glamorous, but every Christmas spread felt incomplete without them. The preparation was beautifully simple. Fresh celery stalks were washed, trimmed, and sliced into short, sturdy pieces, forming little canoes. The filling was where each family showed its personality. The classic version combined cream cheese with blue cheese or Roquefort, beaten until smooth and tangy. Others preferred a milder mixture with chopped pimientos, walnuts, or even dates for a hint of sweetness. The mixture was spooned or piped into each celery groove, creating a contrast of creamy filling against a crunchy base. A light sprinkle of paprika or chopped nuts added color for the holiday table. Stuffed celery boats may not have been the star of the party, but they played an indispensable supporting role. They refreshed the palate, reset the appetite, and offered a clean, crisp counterpoint to heavier dishes. And in their gentle simplicity, they reflected something true about mid-century holiday cooking. Not every dish had to dazzle to be meaningful. Ham and pickle roll-ups. Before holiday appetizers became elaborate or chef-inspired, some of the most beloved dishes were born from pure practicality. Ham and pickle roll-ups are a perfect example. A simple, no-cook appetizer that showed up at countless Christmas gatherings because it was quick, affordable, and unexpectedly addictive. The process couldn't have been easier. Thin slices of deli ham were laid flat, spread with a generous layer of softened cream cheese, and topped with a whole dill pickle. Then everything was rolled tightly, chilled until firm, and cut into neat little pinwheels. What looked plain on the outside delivered a surprising burst of flavor: salty ham, creamy cheese, and that sharp, tangy crunch from the pickle. Some families added a thin smear of mustard or Worcestershire to the cream cheese for extra depth, while others used sweet pickles for a milder bite. These roll-ups weren't showpieces, but they vanished faster than almost anything else on the table. Kids loved them because they felt like finger food made just for them. Adults appreciated their bold, refreshing flavor amid a sea of heavy holiday dishes. Pigs in a blanket. Pigs in a blanket, in their original form, were a far cry from the modern crescent roll versions we see today. These early holiday favorites started with full-size sausages, breakfast links, bratwursts, or whatever the family could afford, dipped in a homemade batter rather than wrapped in pre-made dough. The batter was simple: flour, eggs, milk, and just a touch of sugar to help the outside brown beautifully in the oven. Each sausage was coated and placed carefully on a greased baking sheet, then baked until the exterior puffed up into a golden, slightly crisp shell. Once cooled just enough to handle, the rolls were sliced into rounds, revealing a warm, steamy center surrounded by a fluffy layer of bread. A plate piled high with these hearty bites could feed a room full of guests with little effort and almost no expense. Paired with mustard or a tangy dipping sauce, they delivered the perfect mix of savory sausage and comforting homemade batter. And while they weren't fancy or delicate, nobody cared. These were the kind of appetizers people hovered around, grabbing them straight off the platter while making conversation. Proof that the most memorable holiday foods were often the simplest ones. Chicken liver mousse. Chicken liver mousse was one of those appetizers that instantly revealed who at the party was adventurous and who preferred to hover near the cheese tray. Pale pink, silky smooth, and served in elegant little bowls, it carried an air of sophistication that felt worlds apart from everyday cooking. For home entertainers of the era, mastering it wasn't just about flavor, it was about proving they could bring a touch of French refinement into an American living room. The process required precision. Chicken livers were sautéed gently with butter and shallots until barely cooked through, then blended piping hot with more butter, a splash of brandy or cognac, heavy cream, and herb. When strained through a fine sieve, the mixture transformed into a mousse so velvety it almost melted at the touch of a spoon. After chilling overnight beneath a thin seal of clarified butter, it was ready to be served with toast points or crackers. The flavor was rich, earthy, and undeniably bold. An acquired taste for some, a holiday highlight for others. If this classic holiday bite brings back the smell, the warmth, and the memories of gatherings long past, tap the like button below so we can keep these cherished traditions alive for the next generation. Sausage balls. Sausage balls earned their place at holiday gatherings not through elegance, but through sheer dependability. You could always count on them to disappear first, made from just 3 ingredients: breakfast sausage, grated cheddar cheese, and biscuit. They were the kind of appetizer that filled the kitchen with a warm, savory smell long before guests arrived. The mixture was kneaded by hand until the cheese and baking mix melded with the sausage fat, forming a dough-like texture that could be rolled into small, bite-sized balls. As they baked, the edges crisped while the center stayed tender and slightly crumbly. A good batch released just enough fat to brown beautifully without turning greasy, a balance every seasoned home cook quietly prided themselves on. They were perfect served warm, straight from the oven, but still held their charm at room temperature. Ideal for long evenings of gift exchanges and endless conversations. What made sausage balls memorable wasn't their simplicity. It was the comfort they brought. A platter placed on a holiday table meant abundance, warmth, and the kind of hospitality that didn't need decoration or fuss. Oysters Rockefeller Dip. Oysters. Rockefeller Dip brought a touch of New Orleans luxury to holiday tables without requiring anyone to shuck a single shell. Instead of serving whole oysters, intimidating for many home cooks at the time, families embraced this warm, bubbling dip that delivered all the same rich flavors in a more approachable form. The base began with onions and garlic sautéed in generous amounts of butter until fragrant. Fresh spinach was added next, wilting down into the mixture before chopped canned oysters and their briny liquor were stirred in a splash of Pernod or another anise-flavored liqueur gave it that signature aromatic bite, followed by heavy cream and plenty of Parmesan to thicken everything into a velvety, savory mixture. Once transferred to a baking dish and topped with breadcrumbs and more cheese, it baked until golden and gently simmering at the edges. Served with crackers or toasted baguette slices, the dip offered a bold, ocean-kissed flavor, the kind of appetizer adults gravitated toward while children eyed it with suspicion. It felt festive, indulgent, and slightly adventurous, the kind of dish that made a living room in Ohio or Kansas feel just a little closer to the French Quarter. Vienna Sausages. Vienna sausages may seem like an unlikely Christmas appetizer today, but for decades they held a quiet place on many holiday tables. Compact, inexpensive, and endlessly adaptable, these little canned sausages were a pantry staple that home cooks relied on when budgets were tight or unexpected guests arrived. Most families served them straight from the can, arranged neatly on a small relish tray alongside pickles and olives. Others preferred to warm them in a sweet and tangy sauce made from grape jelly and chili sauce, the same combination beloved in cocktail meatballs. A few creative hosts wrapped them in thin strips of bacon or pastry dough before baking, transforming them into miniature savory bites that were surprisingly satisfying. Their mild, salty flavor made them strangely appealing to kids, who often speared them eagerly with toothpicks, while adults appreciated how effortlessly they filled out a holiday spread. For many working-class households, Vienna sausages weren't a conversation piece. They were practical, reliable, and familiar. Shrimp Cocktail Wreath. Shrimp cocktail was already a holiday favorite by the mid-century years, but the shrimp cocktail wreath took things to a whole new level, turning a simple appetizer into a centerpiece worthy of the dining room table. Cooks would start by arranging crisp lettuce leaves or sprigs of parsley in a perfect ring on a circular platter. Then came the shrimp, usually the small, pre-cooked frozen kind that fit most family budgets. Each piece was carefully placed in a neat pattern around the wreath, their pink curves mimicking ornaments. A bowl of cocktail sauce sat proudly in the center, bright red and tangy, giving the whole display an unmistakably festive look. Families loved this dish because it felt upscale without being expensive. You didn't need fresh Gulf shrimp or fancy garnishes. Even a modest grocery bag could create something that looked impressive on the table. And when guests arrived, they always paused for a moment, smiling at the creativity before reaching in for a bite. Pimento cheese pinwheels. Pimento cheese pinwheels were the kind of appetizer that made people stop mid-conversation just to see how they were made. They looked fancy, like something from a magazine spread, but in truth, they were among the easiest holiday bites a home cook could prepare. Everything started with classic southern pimento cheese, sharp cheddar shredded by hand, mayonnaise stirred until smooth, diced pimentos for color, and a little onion or paprika depending on family tradition. Instead of serving it as a spread, the mixture was generously smeared across soft flour tortillas or thin sandwich bread slices that had been rolled flat with a kitchen glass. Once tightly rolled, the log was chilled until firm, then sliced into perfect spirals that revealed that festive red and gold swirl. These cheerful little rounds appeared at countless holiday open houses and office parties because they traveled well, filled a platter quickly, and offered a creamy richness that felt indulgent without straining anyone's budget. Kids loved their mild flavor, adults appreciated their nostalgia, and hosts adored how effortlessly they disappeared. Now, did your family ever make these colorful little pinwheels for holiday parties? If you remember them or still make them today, share your memories in the comments below. Marinated mushrooms. Among all the appetizers that crowded holiday tables, marinated mushrooms offered something a little different. Bright, tangy, and wonderfully aromatic. They weren't flashy, but their flavor delivered a quiet sophistication that made them a favorite among adults who wanted something beyond the usual cheese and cracker fare. Most families used small white button mushrooms, the inexpensive kind found in every supermarket produce section. After a quick blanch to soften them slightly, the mushrooms were tossed into a warm marinade made from olive oil or salad oil, vinegar, garlic, dried oregano, crushed red pepper, and sometimes a pinch of sugar to balance the acidity. As they cooled, the mushrooms soaked in every bit of that garlicky, herby brine, turning into tender, flavorful bites that grew better with every passing hour. By the time guests arrived, the dish had fully transformed. The mushrooms glistened under the dining room lights, carrying a perfume of herbs that drifted across the table. They were served with toothpicks alongside olives, pickled onions, and cold cuts. A small but important part of the holiday relish trays, so common in the 1960s and 70s. Cheese-stuffed dates. Cheese-stuffed dates were one of those appetizers that quietly elevated any holiday gathering. They didn't draw attention with bold colors or elaborate shapes. Yet the moment someone tasted one, the platter emptied fast. The magic came from contrast. Sweet, sticky dates paired with a cool, creamy filling that felt surprisingly luxurious for such a tiny bite. Most home cooks used pitted dates sold in slim plastic trays at the grocery store each winter. The centers were filled with a small spoonful of cream cheese or blue cheese, depending on the family's taste. Some rolled the stuffed dates in chopped nuts, walnuts, pecans, or almonds, to add texture and richness. Others wrapped them in thin bacon slices and baked them until the edges crisped, turning them into warm, smoky morsels that vanished almost instantly. These little bites fit perfectly into the hosting style of the 60s and 70s. Simple ingredients, quick assembly, and a payoff far greater than the effort required. They felt special without being complicated, indulgent without costing much, and festive enough to earn a permanent place on many Christmas platters. Holiday olive cheese spread. Olive cheese spread was the kind of appetizer that always seemed to appear right when guests were getting hungry, but dinner was still an hour away. It didn't rely on fancy ingredients, just a clever blend of flavors that made people linger around the coffee table a little longer. The base was usually a mixture of softened cream cheese and shredded cheddar, beaten together until smooth. Into that went chopped green olives, pimentos, and sometimes a handful of black olives for extra depth. A dash of Worcestershire sauce or a sprinkle of garlic powder gave the mixture a gentle, savory kick, turning the spread into something far more interesting than the humble ingredients suggested. Once chilled, it was served with crispy crackers, celery sticks, or thinly sliced baguette. The salty bite of the olives against the richness of the cheese made it surprisingly addictive. Just one more. Quickly became 4 or 5 hosts loved it because it could be made hours in advance. And guests loved it because it felt nostalgic, comforting, and bold all at once. Sardine Canapés. At a time when canned fish was a pantry staple, many home cooks discovered that sardines, cheap, flavorful, and surprisingly versatile, could be dressed up into something worthy of the Christmas table. Most versions began with thin rounds of toasted bread or crackers, spread lightly with softened butter or a swipe of cream cheese. A sardine fillet, drained and carefully split in half, was laid on top. Some families added sliced olives for a pop of color, while others used a dab of Dijon mustard or a squeeze of lemon to brighten the flavor. A sprinkle of paprika or chopped parsley finished the look, giving each canapé a festive, almost European touch. What made these bites memorable wasn't just the taste, it was how grown up they felt. Children usually walked right past them, but adults hovered nearby, picking them up 2 at a time while chatting by the fireplace or the punch bowl. Bacon-wrapped water chestnuts. Long before bacon became a culinary trend, this dish used it in one of the most irresistible ways. Wrapped tightly around crisp, juicy water chestnuts that popped with every bite. Most families bought canned whole water chestnuts from the supermarket, drained them well, and marinated them briefly in a mixture of soy sauce, brown sugar, and sometimes a little Worcestershire sauce. Each piece was then wrapped in half a strip of bacon and secured with a toothpick. As they baked, the bacon turned deep golden and caramelized, coating the chestnuts in a smoky sweet glaze that made them nearly impossible to walk past without grabbing one. They came out of the oven sizzling, with edges crisp and centers still cool and crunchy, a contrast that guests remembered long after the decorations were taken down. These little bites weren't fancy, but they offered the perfect combination of savory, sweet, and smoky, making them a guaranteed crowd pleaser at countless holiday gatherings. Still with us on this nostalgic journey? Drop a yes in the comments so we know you're enjoying it. Deviled ham spread. Deviled ham spread was one of those dependable appetizers that quietly anchored holiday snack tables. It didn't need bright colors or fancy garnishes. Its charm came from the salty, savory punch packed into every creamy bite. For hosts juggling multiple dishes at once, this spread was a lifesaver. Fast to mix, easy to dress up, and guaranteed to disappear quickly. Most home cooks started with a can of deviled ham. the familiar rectangular tin that lived in many American cupboards. Once emptied into a bowl, it was blended with mayonnaise or softened cream cheese to mellow its sharpness. Finely chopped celery, onion, or sweet pickles added crunch, while a dash of mustard or paprika deepened the flavor. Some families stretched the mixture with hard-boiled eggs, turning it into something richer and more substantial. Spread on crackers, stuffed into celery sticks, or used as a filling for tiny cocktail sandwiches, deviled ham was surprisingly versatile. Its bold, smoky flavor felt hearty during cold December nights, making it a quiet favorite among adults. Cheese-and-Pickle Skewers. Cheese-and-Pickle Skewers were the kind of appetizer that looked almost too simple to be memorable until you tasted one. These tiny bites delivered a perfect balance of creamy, sharp, and tangy, making them a surprise favorite at countless holiday gatherings. Hosts typically used cubes of cheddar, Colby, or Monterey Jack, cutting the blocks into neat little squares that stacked easily onto toothpicks. Next came the pickles, most often small gherkins or bread and butter slices, chosen for their sweet and sour punch. Some families added a slice of salami or a cocktail onion between the layers, turning each skewer into a miniature tower of contrasting flavors. The result was colorful, cheerful, and endlessly snackable. Kids liked the bright look. Adults appreciated how the pickles cut through the richness of the cheese. And from a host perspective, these skewers were practically magic. Inexpensive, impossible to mess up, and quick to assemble even at the last minute. Ham roll-ups. Ham roll-ups were one of those appetizers that vanished almost as quickly as they could be made. Their appeal wasn't flashy presentation or exotic ingredients. It was the effortless combination of salty ham, creamy filling, and a satisfying bite-sized shape that felt just right on a holiday platter. Cooks usually started with thin slices of deli ham, the kind folded neatly in plastic packages at the supermarket. Each slice was laid flat and spread with a mixture that varied from home to home. Sometimes plain cream cheese, sometimes a blend of cream cheese and chopped green onions, sweet relish, or finely diced pimentos for color. The ham was then rolled tightly into a log and chilled until firm. Once sliced into neat spirals, the pieces revealed cheerful pink and white swirls that looked surprisingly festive. Some families tucked a pickle spear inside before rolling, giving the center a crunchy, tangy kick. Others preferred the classic version, simple, soft, and savory. Ham roll-ups fit perfectly into the fast-paced hosting style of the 60s and 70s. Inexpensive ingredients, minimal effort, and a final product that felt much more special than the preparation suggested. Cheese puff pastries. Cheese puff pastries were the kind of appetizer that made a holiday table feel just a little more elegant, even in a modest home. Their golden, flaky layers looked impressive, but the secret behind them was wonderfully simple. Most cooks relied on store-bought puff pastry or biscuit dough, turning an everyday ingredient into something party-worthy. The filling was usually a blend of shredded cheddar or Swiss cheese, mixed with a touch of mustard or Worcestershire sauce for depth. Some families added minced onions or chopped pimentos, giving the filling a festive color and a gentle bite. A small spoonful of the mixture was placed onto each square of dough, which was then folded, pinched, or rolled into little pockets before baking. As the pastries baked, the kitchen filled with the unmistakable smell of warm butter and melting cheese. When they emerged from the oven puffed and golden, they were almost impossible to resist. Crisp on the outside, soft and savory in the center. Guests often grabbed them straight off the tray, too impatient to wait for them to cool. Cocktail meatballs. Cocktail meatballs earned their legendary status for one simple reason. They delivered big flavor with almost no effort. At a time when holiday hosts balanced cooking, cleaning, and entertaining all at once, these little bites were a dependable favorite. Warm, saucy, and always the first empty dish on the table. Most families started with homemade meatballs made from ground beef mixed with breadcrumbs and egg and whatever seasonings were on hand. Once browned, the meatballs were simmered in a sauce that became iconic during the 60s and 70s, a mix of grape jelly and chili sauce. It sounded strange, even a bit questionable to newcomers, but the result was unforgettable. The jelly melted into a glossy sweetness while the chili sauce added tang and a mild kick, creating a glaze that clung perfectly to every bite. As they bubbled in the slow cooker, the aroma drifted through the house. Sweet, savory, and undeniably festive. Guests would hover nearby with toothpicks, fishing out meatballs before they even made it to the serving platter. 25 Christmas traditions from the 1960s that completely disappeared. Christmas in the 1960s was a period of stark contrasts. The discipline of the Christmas Club went hand in hand with the excitement of turning the thick pages of the Sears wish book. From lead tinsel to the smell of burning wrapping paper, every tradition contained irreplaceable memories. Today, let's go back and uncover the beautiful Christmas customs that now only exist in memory. Aluminum Christmas trees. For American families from 1959 until the late 1960s, these shimmering silver trees were not merely decorations. They were the peak of modern sophistication, representing the fresh space age era. The Aluminum Specialty Company, based in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, pioneered this trend, producing over 1 million of these magical metal trees. The aluminum trees came in various sizes ranging from 2 to 8 feet, with branch tips resembling silver bottle brushes, creating an industrial and sleek appearance. At the time, they cost between $15 and $25, which is equivalent to about $150 to $250 today. Unfortunately, this shimmering beauty came with a major technical problem. It was impossible to use traditional Christmas lights due to the serious risk of electric shock. To solve this problem, a complex additional device was introduced and became iconic: the bubble lights on trees. This magical, gentle, crackling sensation is no longer a common Christmas experience. Imagine standing in front of the Christmas tree, gazing at the glass tubes filled with colored liquid, twinkling on the branches. These enchanting decorations, introduced by Noma Electric in 1946 and peaking in popularity in the 1960s, function like small kettles. The light bulb inside would heat the light liquid, usually a type of oil. After about a 5-minute warm-up period, the liquid would begin to bubble, creating continuous movement and a ceaseless, shimmering magic. Children of that era were mesmerized and drawn to these bubble lights. A 7-light string cost about $2.99 in 1965, equivalent to about $28 today. Bubble lights also presented their own challenges. Each light was made of fragile glass and easily broken. When broken, the mysterious liquid inside would spill out. Although it was considered relatively non-toxic, it still caused anxiety for parents. Furthermore, these strings of lights consumed a significant amount of electricity, increasing the electric bill. By the mid-1970s, concerns about the energy crisis and stricter safety regulations significantly reduced their popularity. The innovation of safer electronic lights replaced them. Although reproduction bubble lights exist today, they lack the unpredictability and authentic beauty of the vintage originals. Color wheel. These were giant spinning discs with colored gel panels, red, blue, green, and amber. This wheel shone directly onto the tree, causing the silver pine to continuously change color in the darkroom, creating a dramatic and vibrant light show. By 1965, the craze had peaked, with nearly 40% of American households owning one. However, the fall of the aluminum tree was as fast as its rise. The special program Charlie Brown's Christmas in 1965 straightforwardly criticized their artificiality, emphasizing that they lacked the traditional Christmas spirit. This criticism, along with changing tastes, caused sales to plummet by 1969. Today, vintage aluminum trees are only sought after by collectors who are willing to pay hundreds of dollars on online auction sites. But their dominance in Christmas living rooms has completely vanished. Handmade paper chain decorations. Handmade paper was indispensable for Christmas decorations in almost every classroom and home during this period. Indoors, miles of chains strung up were a familiar sight every holiday season. This tradition centered on children's participation. Children were tasked with this activity throughout the winter break, spending hours cutting strips of colored paper, forming them into loops, and then gluing them together. The chains often followed specific color patterns, repeating red, green, and white. In 1967, a packet of colored paper cost only 49 cents. Schools often turned paper chain making into contests where classes competed to see who could create the longest chain. Some families even used magazine pages or old wrapping paper to make chains. The paper chains were hung everywhere, over doorways, windows, fireplaces, and along stair railings. However, they had one major weakness. Humidity or rain could cause a disaster, dissolving the glue and making these long chains fall down. By the mid-1970s, pre-manufactured garlands and decorations became cheap and easily accessible. Modern parents, busier with work, no longer had time for such labor-intensive handcrafting. Your own tree. Moving into the 1970s, Christmas often came with the attempt to recreate a winter wonderland right in the living room. Do-it-yourself kits for applying artificial snow at home were a Christmas staple. These kits contained spray guns, adhesive, and white cellulose fibers. Since professional flocking services could cost up to $105, DIY was the most economical way. The process was a messy and chaotic family experience. Families had to spread newspapers everywhere, mix the solution, and spend hours spraying faux snow onto the tree. Some people even used a reversed vacuum cleaner to blow the material. This required wearing protective goggles, and the results varied wildly, from a perfect winter spectacle to disasters resembling a sick tree. The bigger problem was health. Flocking powder contained asbestos until 1969, a health risk that no one realized at the time. Cleanup was also a nightmare, with white residue appearing for months afterward. By 1975, pre-flocked artificial trees became popular and easier. Environmental concerns related to aerosols and chemicals also contributed to the end of this messy but memorable tradition. Window displays. In the golden age of downtown centers, large department stores spared no expense in creating intricate and spectacular Christmas displays. Stores like Macy's, Gimbel's, Wanamaker's, and Marshall Field's fiercely competed to have the most breathtaking display. For example, Macy's 1962 display cost $75,000, equivalent to about $750,000 today, and required year-round planning. Far from simple mannequins, they were complex, automated wonderlands. They featured mechanical moving figures, miniature train models, and synchronized music. Families regarded visiting these windows as a mandatory Christmas pilgrimage. They lined up for blocks, and parents had to lift children onto their shoulders so they could see clearly. The displays were even changed weekly throughout the season to encourage multiple visits. By the late 1970s, the growth of suburban shopping malls reduced customer traffic in downtown areas. The huge cost of these theatrical presentations was no longer acceptable to large department stores. Most stores had eliminated these complex displays by 1985. The remaining displays today are only pale shadows compared to the grand, theatrical productions that once defined the urban Christmas experience. TV Yule log broadcasting. In 1966, New York's WPIX channel created a surprisingly simple television phenomenon. They continuously broadcast the scene of a burning fireplace for 3 hours on Christmas Eve. The original 16mm film, which cost $4,000 to produce, showed the fireplace scene from Gracie Mansion, accompanied by soothing Christmas music. The idea seemed lazy, and TV critics mocked it as the pinnacle of slothful programming. But the truth was that audiences loved it. For those living in apartments without a real fireplace, the Yule log provided a virtual hearth. People gathered around the television, pretending that the electronic fire offered warmth and a festive atmosphere. The Yule log attracted a surprising number of viewers, beating out regular programming. Other cities, such as WGN in Chicago and KTLA in Los Angeles, quickly copied the idea. The original film was damaged from overuse, requiring a remake in 1970. But the real end of this tradition came with the arrival of cable television in the 1980s. The Yule log's monopoly on the screen ended. Although digital versions now exist on online platforms like YouTube, the communal experience of everyone watching the same televised fireplace has been completely extinguished. Sears Wishbook arrivals. If you could go back in time and open the 600-page Wishbook, what would you choose? For American children in the 60s, the arrival of the Sears Christmas Wishbook catalog in late summer was a major event. comparable to Christmas morning itself. These enormous catalogs, often up to 600 pages thick and weighing nearly 5 pounds, were mailed to mailboxes in August. Children quickly claimed them, spending months poring over and circling desired toys with different colored crayons. The 1969 version had 225 pages dedicated solely to toys. Wise parents used these books as a behavioral control tool, reminding children that Santa Claus was watching their choices in the wish book. Sears spent $100 million annually to produce and mail these books. For rural families, these catalogs were especially important because Sears might be their only shopping option. By Christmas, the books were often crumpled, tattered, and covered in marker circles. Toy commercials during Saturday cartoons. Saturday mornings in December were not just about cartoons. They were hour-long toy infomercials. Toy companies like Mattel purchased huge blocks of advertising, showing the same commercials repeatedly. Children quickly memorized the jingles for Rock'em Sock'em Robots, Easy Bake Ovens, and G.I. Joe. These commercials were complex mini-productions, using elaborate setups to make the toys look magical and appealing. Young children watched specific shows just to see the toy commercials, building their Christmas wish list based on what they saw. The ads often showed children playing in impossible scenarios. Basements turned into battlefields, bedrooms becoming doll castles. With the text batteries not included appearing in the corner of the screen, parents began complaining about this manipulation. The Federal Trade Commission, FTC, investigated deceptive practices, finding that ads used camera tricks to enhance the toy's real capabilities. By 1978, advocacy groups successfully imposed commercial restrictions. Christmas corsages for women. Receiving and wearing a Christmas corsage was a common tradition that every woman looked forward to. These were not simple pieces of jewelry. Florists created elaborate bouquets, often including poinsettias, holly sprigs, miniature pine cones, and silver bells, along with ribbons and small bells. Depending on their complexity, they cost between $3 and $8 in 1965. Women wore these corsages to church, office parties, and family dinners. They were a way for women to compare and evaluate their husband's thoughtfulness and generosity. Corsage refrigerators even appeared in supermarkets during December. Wearing a corsage required specific rituals. It had to be worn on the left shoulder, removed when cooking, and stored in the refrigerator. This tradition began to fade in the mid-1970s. The women's liberation movement of the 70s criticized corsages as symbols of female decoration, diminishing their relevance. By 1975, formal Christmas corsages had almost completely disappeared. Fruitcake as actual gifts need tinsel. When you look at Christmas photos from the 1960s, you will notice an irreplaceable characteristic: the perfect sparkle of metal strands hanging perfectly straight on the tree. As it turns out, those shimmering strands were not plastic or aluminum, as they are today. They were lead foil. Lead tinsel, invented in Germany in 1610, created an unparalleled brilliance that no modern material can match. The weight of the lead was the key factor, helping the tinsel hang perfectly vertically like silver waterfalls, creating a luxurious and neat appearance. In 1965, a box of 1,000 strands cost only 39 cents, about $3.50 today. Because they were considered precious, families were very careful, spending hours placing each strand of tinsel on the tree and carefully taking them down to reuse the next year. Occasionally, children, in their excitement, would sometimes grab handfuls and throw them onto the tree to quickly create sparkle. This tradition ended abruptly when the FDA banned lead tinsel in 1972 due to the risk of poisoning, especially for children. Manufacturers switched to aluminum and plastic, but these replacement materials known as mylar tinsel were lighter, tangled easily, and created static electricity, never replicating the unique characteristics of lead. Consequently, many families gave up using tinsel entirely. That distinctive heavy sparkle now only exists in black and white photos. Flocking mandatory office Christmas parties. If you worked in the late 1960s, attending the company Christmas party was not an option. It was an unwritten requirement that could affect your career. Companies spent lavishly. These parties were often held at luxury hotels or country clubs, starting promptly at 6 p.m. on Fridays in December. The parties featured big bands, open bars, and required formal attire. For example, the General Motors party in 1968 in Detroit cost up to $50,000, about $425,000 today. Absence required an explanation for months afterward. Guests were often spouses, and dancing with the boss's wife was considered politically essential. Gifts were exchanged publicly, with secretaries receiving perfume and executives receiving desk sets. Polaroid cameras captured embarrassing moments that later became office legends. By 1975, social and legal factors ended these extravagant parties. Concerns about workplace equality made mandatory events involving spouses problematic. More importantly, drunk driving lawsuits put an end to unlimited open bars. The economic recession also made lavish budgets unacceptable. Christmas seals on everything. In the golden age of the 1960s, it was rare to receive a Christmas letter or package without a small stamp, featuring Santa Claus or a festive pine tree affixed to the corner of the envelope. These were not regular postage stamps, but Christmas seals, symbols of charitable spirit and compassion during the holiday season. This initiative began in 1907 under the patronage of the American Lung Association, aiming to raise funds for tuberculosis programs. By 1967, the campaign had reached its peak, with over 85 million households across the U.S. receiving sheets of seals via mail, often accompanied by a request for a donation. Each year, the design changed, featuring familiar characters like reindeer, snowmen, or snow scenes, fully embodying the Christmas spirit. Although not mandatory, most families sent back a small amount, typically a few dollars, as a way to show gratitude and a spirit of sharing. In many schools, children were even encouraged to participate in seal-selling competitions, spreading the movement throughout the community. One of the most famous designs was the 1969 version by artist Norman Rockwell, which is collected by many even today. In 1968, the campaign raised up to $35 million, an impressive figure for the time. Moving into the 1980s, as direct mail fundraising flooded in and the email era gradually emerged, these small charity stamps lost their prominence. Nevertheless, in the memories of many Americans, Christmas seals remain symbols of an era full of simple generosity and shared joy. Blue company-sponsored children's parties. Large companies in the 1960s frequently hosted extravagant Christmas parties specifically for employees' children. These were grand Saturday afternoon events aimed at building company loyalty and community. For example, Ford's 1967 party in Detroit served 15,000 children at a cost of $75,000. The parties included entertainment such as magicians, puppet shows, and cartoons. Every child received an age-appropriate gift, carefully selected by the Human Resources Department. Real department store Santas listened to wishes, while photographers captured the moments. Companies rented convention centers or decorated factory floors. Lunch included hot dogs, hamburgers, ice cream, and unlimited soda. There were even activities like mini pony rides or fair games. However, by 1975, liability insurance made these events too expensive. Furthermore, workforce diversity and issues concerning the attendance of working mothers made specifically Christmas-themed parties problematic. Christmas morning. Trash burning. Immediately after opening presents, 1960s families had a practical and spectacular ritual: immediately burning the wrapping paper, boxes, and ribbons in the fireplace or a backyard incinerator. This tradition aimed to instantly clean up the huge accumulation of paper. Burning the wrapping paper created brilliant flames from the colored paper, which was entertaining for children. The smell of burning wrapping paper became a characteristic sensory memory of Christmas morning. Some communities had traditional burning hours at noon, when smoke rose from every chimney. Rural families used incinerator drums, creating towering flames. Fire departments reported a spike in calls on Christmas morning due to uncontrolled wrapping paper fires. However, by 1970, air quality regulations began to restrict trash burning. The emergence of recycling awareness made burning trash seem wasteful. Modern toys had more complex packaging, and environmental consciousness eliminated this tradition around 1978. It is hard to believe for modern audiences, But during the 1960s and early 1970s, giving and receiving fruitcake was a heartfelt and appreciated Christmas tradition. Fruitcake was not a joke, but a cherished gift. Many families made their own cakes, spending days preparing and soaking dried fruits in brandy or rum for months. A quality fruitcake could require $50 worth of ingredients in 1968, equivalent to about $125 today. Companies like Collins Street Bakery shipped millions of cakes nationwide. Recipients genuinely valued them, serving them to esteemed guests as a special dessert. The best fruitcakes were often made in October to allow enough time for aging. They were also practical gifts because they could last for months without refrigeration. However, this tradition was unexpectedly destroyed by humor. Johnny Carson's frequent jokes on The Tonight Show in the 1970s severely damaged fruitcake's reputation. By 1980, fruitcake had become a comedy prop instead of a sincere gift. Share this video with someone who lived through the 60s. Maybe they will smile remembering those Christmases past. Christmas bonus: cigarettes as Christmas gifts. It is hard to imagine today, but cigarettes were a premium, sophisticated, and valued Christmas gift throughout the 1960s and early 1970s. Cartons of cigarettes were wrapped in festive paper and placed under the Christmas tree. Brands like Philip Morris created special gift sets that included lighters and ashtrays. A carton of cigarettes cost about $2.40 in 1965, making them an affordable but substantial gift. Advertisements frequently showed Santa Claus smoking, with slogans encouraging, "Give the gift of pleasure." Even non-smokers gave cigarettes as thoughtful gifts. Teenagers bought cigarettes for their parents without any opposition. The Surgeon General's report in 1964 warning about the dangers of smoking had very little impact on this gift-giving habit. Television advertisements continued to promote cigarettes as thoughtful gifts until 1970. Live Christmas trees in classrooms. Every classroom had its own separate real Christmas tree. These pine trees were brought in after Thanksgiving and became the center of festive joy, decorated by the students themselves. This was a competitive craft activity, with teachers often paying out of their own pockets to buy the trees at a cost of about $5. Classes competed for the title of the best decorated tree, with the principal serving as the judge of the contest. Students spent time during art class creating handmade decorations. They made popcorn chains, paper snowflakes, and handmade paper chains. The tree required daily care, so watering became a rotating student responsibility. Even cleaning up the dropped pine needles on the floor became a form of punishment. Some teachers were ambitious enough to flock the trees themselves right in the classroom, despite the massive mess this created. The rich smell of fresh pine in a classroom filled with twinkling lights was a characteristic sensory memory of December. Behind this romance lay a huge danger. The risk of fire was enormous due to the trees drying out over time, flammable paper decorations, and frequently overloaded electrical outlets. A few tragic school fires occurred in the early 1970s, forcing safety regulations to change. By 1975, artificial trees began replacing real ones, and eventually insurance concerns, along with awareness of religious diversity and allergy issues, eliminated trees, even artificial ones, from public schools. The universal experience of decorating the classroom Christmas tree together has completely disappeared from the public education system. Christmas plays in every school. In the early 1970s, U.S. public schools almost universally held elaborate Christmas plays without causing any controversy. This was a universal reality. Every child participated regardless of religion. These plays were not brief performances. They consumed the entire December curriculum with weeks of strenuous rehearsals. The content of the plays was explicit and religious. The performances openly included nativity scenes, angels, the three kings, and religious songs. This occurred before the Epper versus Arkansas Supreme Court case in 1968 began to raise concerns about religious content in schools. Parents, especially mothers, spent months sewing costumes. Bed sheets were cleverly transformed into shepherd robes, and tinfoil was placed over cardboard crowns for the wise men. Schools competed fiercely to have the most complicated and elaborate backdrops and costumes. Teachers even spent personal money on decorations and set design. The evening performance was a major event, drawing large audiences, filling auditoriums with extended families. Local newspapers even seriously reviewed these elementary school plays. The Christmas play greatly influenced the children's social hierarchy. Who played Mary or Joseph was extremely important and valued. Notably, Jewish, Muslim, and atheist families rarely publicly opposed their children's participation in these overtly religious performances. Some schools even performed the same traditional play annually, as cash envelopes. At this time, employers handing out envelopes containing cash as a Christmas bonus was a common practice, a tradition that is nearly extinct today. This was not a performance-based bonus, but an expected seasonal gift. The average bonus in 1968 was a week's salary. The bonus was given in new, crisp cash, often taken from banks that had stockpiled extra money for the bonus season. Employers, from small grocery stores to large factories, often personally presented the envelopes to employees on the last workday before Christmas. Sometimes, companies organized a ceremony for handing out the envelopes, where the boss called out each employee's name. This personalized act and the feeling of holding the cash in hand generated genuine gratitude. Employees relied on this bonus for Christmas spending, sometimes spending in advance based on the expected amount. By the late 1970s, stricter IRS tax regulations required documentation and immediate tax withholding. Direct deposit and gift cards replaced the cash envelope, eliminating that moment of suspense and excitement when opening the envelope filled with cash. Real candles on Christmas trees. The tradition of lighting real candles on Christmas trees, particularly popular among families of German or Scandinavian descent, was a beautiful but terribly dangerous ritual. Despite the obvious fire risk, many families maintained this custom throughout the 1960s. Small white candles were affixed to the ends of the branches using special clips. To ensure safety, families adhered to extremely strict rituals. Candles were only lit for a few minutes, usually on Christmas Eve, and were never allowed to leave the room. Buckets of water and fire extinguishers were always kept nearby, and family members were assigned strict watch duty. The flickering, warm light of real candles created an unparalleled Christmas atmosphere, a magical glow that electric lights could not replicate. However, the price of this romance was high. The National Fire Protection Association in 1964 reported up to 8,000 Christmas tree fires annually, with candles being the leading cause. Insurance companies fiercely opposed it, and fire departments conducted major campaigns against the practice. By 1972, most cities had completely banned this dangerous tradition. Safer electric lights with significantly improved technology offered a better alternative. This dangerous yet magical tradition faded away forever. New channel, old memories. Help us share more by promoting this video. Every promotion makes a huge difference. Door-to-door caroling. Churches, youth groups, and scout troops often organized caroling routes as an annual tradition. During these years of the decade, seeing groups of carolers going from house to house on December evenings was completely normal. Family members also frequently joined together. What made this tradition distinctive was the homeowner's expectation. Families were not surprised. They prepared with cookies and hot chocolate to offer the carolers. The singing groups carried songbooks and flashlights, moving through neighborhoods along organized routes. Some groups also carried UNICEF boxes or other collection bins to raise funds for charity. This activity peaked around 1968, when an estimated 60% of American neighborhoods had the caroling experience. By the mid-1970s, things began to change. Growing concerns about stranger danger, busier family lifestyles, and a reluctance to get involved in legal liability issues started to discourage organization. The development of gated communities and apartment complexes made spontaneous caroling impossible. Department store sending Christmas cards to everyone. This was it, the undisputed peak period of Christmas card culture. By 1968, Americans sent about 4 billion cards annually. This was a prolonged and meticulous social ritual. Families maintained card lists with hundreds of names, often updating addresses yearly in special notebooks. The process started in November, preparing envelopes, adding personal notes, and affixing stamps. Some families even included detailed family newsletters about the year's activities, typed on carbon paper to make multiple copies. Christmas cards were also an important part of home decoration. The display of cards was highly competitive. People strung ribbons across doorways or arranged them on the mantelpiece. Receiving cards from distant relatives or old friends was often the only form of contact throughout the entire year. Postmen delivered sacks of cards every day throughout December, forcing the post office to hire thousands of temporary staff. The zip code introduced in 1963 helped simplify the processing. Do you still keep any special letters or cards today? Share your favorite memory. Christmas Club Savings Accounts. The Christmas Club savings account tradition taught an entire generation of Americans about financial discipline throughout the 1960s. Starting in January every year, millions of Americans deposited a small amount of money, usually from $1 to $10, weekly into special savings accounts at local banks. By 1965, over 14 million Americans participated, saving over $2 billion annually. Customers received special payment booklets with 50 weekly coupons. Uniquely, members did not receive interest. Instead, the bank mailed a cash check in early November. This ensured families had cash readily available for Christmas shopping, often before Thanksgiving. Banks competed by offering promotional gifts upon opening an account, such as toasters, blankets, or dinnerware sets. Banks also had special Christmas Club teller windows during the peak season. This weekly deposit ritual taught children about saving and planning. Churches, youth groups, and scout troops often organized caroling routes as an annual tradition. Laws closing everything. Sundays during the Christmas season of the 1960s were strangely quiet because absolutely nothing was open due to the blue laws. The regulations were established based on religion. This meant that every retail establishment, grocery store, gas station, and department store was completely closed. If you forgot an ingredient for Sunday Christmas dinner, you would have to wait until Monday. Only pharmacies were allowed to open for emergencies, and some even required a police permit. Families had to plan their shopping carefully on Saturday. The enforced quiet of Sunday, without competition from commercial activities, compelled families to spend time together. Churches were packed because there was no other activity to pursue. These laws varied by state, causing confusion. By 1970, commercial pressure began to erode the blue laws. Dual-income families needed Sunday shopping time. Although the Supreme Court upheld the blue laws in a 1961 case, enforcement weakened. By 1978, most states had repealed or stopped enforcing them. Today's 24/7 Christmas shopping would have been unthinkable for 1960s families. Stockings with oranges and nuts. In the 1960s and early 1970s, Christmas stockings always had one thing in the toe: an orange and a mixture of in-shell nuts. This was a tradition from the Great Depression era, but persisted strongly even in affluent families. The orange symbolized exotic luxury because fresh fruit was rare in winter. The nuts were always in-shell: walnuts, Brazil nuts, pecans, and hazelnuts, requiring a nutcracker. The orange was always a navel type, individually wrapped in tissue paper. Children looked forward to these items and felt cheated if they were missing. The nuts filled mesh bags, which cost about 79 cents in 1968. Traditional stockings also contained ribbon candy, chocolate coins, and candy canes. Small toys like jackballs, marbles, yo-yos filled the remaining space. However, by the mid-1970s, the year-round availability of fruit made oranges commonplace. Shelled nuts became more popular. Most importantly, video games and expensive small gifts changed stocking expectations. The simple joy of discovering an orange and nuts on Christmas morning completely vanished. And that wraps up our trip through the Christmas appetizers that once lit up holiday tables across the 60s and 70s. If any of these dishes brought back memories or made you smile at how creative those days really were, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your favorite in the comments. Thanks for joining Back to Yesterday, and we'll see you in the next nostalgic journey.